as you notice, we're getting smoother and smoother with the tech. But Thimm joined us. Anouk unfortunately couldn't be here anymore. Otherwise, we had to just added one because what's really relevant and what we're going to talk about actually quite a bit in this panel is how do we turn research into companies. And Thimm has been a request part of was part of Fresh Ventures. Bart is here as well, I think, on a meeting. And like, how do you turn great ideas into companies? And we're going to talk a bit about. Just let's spend a minute or two as we're setting up things with Thimm, just to introduce yourself here, Regenerate. Whoever was at RFSI in Brussels has seen you pitch as well, but there were a few, I think. So Thimm, just a minute and then we'll go to some slides.
Right. This is funny with these two microphones. Yeah, I'm Thimm. I actually also have a background in remote sensing and Earth observation. And I did a PhD in this direction in risk assessment and analysis. And then I had to quit that in order to start a Fresh Ventures program, which I did. And yeah, since ever then, ever since then, I started working in the. Oh no, you can hear me, right?
You can be a bit further, don't worry.
All right. And since then, I've been working in the soil world, agriculture world, and now what we do is we produce biofuels from intermediary crops. So that means that farmers usually have some idle period after the main crop, and we provide them with seeds, and then they grow that, and we buy off the harvest. And yeah, we found off-takers, and that is the aviation industry, the airlines, and they want to pay for that. And it's good for the farmers because they get actually business models that they can use for growing an intermediary crop, which is great for soil health, especially in combination with other cover crops. And we're doing pilots right now in over like 5 different countries in Europe and are scaling mainly in France this year.
So thank you for that. And I think it's a very interesting dynamic there. There's a company, I remember you coming into Fresh Ventures. We're an advisor there, obsessed with cover crops and trying to find business models around that and looking at, okay, how do we get farmers to do an objectively very good thing when done well, but not a very profitable thing yet. Of course, your soil health improves. It's an investment if we can move it, like we saw yesterday with Tobias. Land banking, all great. And you stumbled upon this market of sustainable aviation fuels. Simply meant we have quite a strict regulation in Europe, and we don't have enough sustainable aviation fuels to replace kerosene or like drop in. And whatever you think of flying, and I know many of you come by train here, the flying will continue for a while, and electric airplanes are coming, but not there yet, definitely. So how do we do something that really makes sense for soil, really makes sense for farmers? Because let's say what you can pay from the big airlines is quite significant, and you do fundamental research as well. Like these are the biggest cover crop trials that anybody has ever done in Europe, just to see what works and what works at scale, and how do you weave it into. And that's that's interesting that we put it on a company to do, actually, because you would wish probably that data was out there and you would just say, okay, in this soil type and this mix, this makes a lot of sense, but a lot of that is unfortunately not there. So just that as an example, and it's actually a funny bridge, because just to give a few words about what brings us here. And we've, as I said, have been very fortunate to follow the regenerative food and agriculture space, and specifically the role of money in that. We started with a question, and I knew quite a few family offices and investors that were asking, this food thing is interesting, but what do I do? And we, of course, don't give investment advice, which is also my second slide. If I click down, yes, oh, this is the background. We started trying to answer that question. I'm not a big investor. We've been lucky enough to invest in a few companies, very small tickets. We'll get to that later. But we see people or saw people building things that we're either investing in land, we're investing in technology, we're investing in cover crops, etc., and trying to connect that with the world of investors. And that kept us busy for now, about 360 episodes. And this is always a nice tagline, would like to say, the next, when I do this presentation for investors, the next 10 years of returns will come from sunlight, soil and superior returns, which gets their attention. Obviously, because the world of investors is waking up to this world, is waking up to the fundamental role healthy soils play. People come into it because of health. People come into it because of climate resilience. People come into it because of their coffee is getting more expensive. People are getting into it because of inequality. And honestly, I don't really care why people are motivated to move their own money in many cases, or the positions they work in. and the position they work in family, in large pension funds and insurance companies, large corporates, as we discussed with Anne-Sophie this morning, people are moving. It's still a very small group. Like if you look at the arc of early adopters, and if you look at how many, but compared to 15 years ago, and I remember speaking to investors 15 years ago, and the moment you mentioned soil, you sort of saw people like phasing off, like, okay, let's talk about electric mobility or education or tech in general. That has changed. That has shifted fundamentally. I'm not saying we're a big group yet. We're still a small bubble, but it's definitely shifting. And we've been very fortunate. Obviously, this is not investment advice. Don't take any of this as investment advice. We've been very fortunate to, unfortunately, see a lot of these things getting out of whack, but we see more people waking up to this. Like, unless we fix food and agriculture, forestry, obviously, aquaculture, unless we fix how we manage land, a lot of these things are going to continue. And the scariest ones are the ones we don't know, which I think are always, to me, the scariest ones. And investors respond to that. They start seeing those reports coming out. They start looking at the food system differently. And so this was the quote actually that got me into the space. I know on the soil carbon side, there's a whole other world to discuss there, which we're not going to do. But Tony Lovell, quite a big investor, unfortunately no longer with us, mentioned this just between like two sentences in a pitch 15 years ago when he was raising 160 million, that's 160, plus another six, from a Danish pension fund to buy a lot of farmland in Australia and regenerate it. And this wasn't part of his pitch. Like the carbon piece wasn't part of his pitch, which was for me very interesting. Now every single farmland fund you will see, everybody in food and agriculture is talking about carbon. 15 years ago, it wasn't. And I asked him why. And he said, because I want to be taken seriously by institutional investors. So just to show how much has changed in terms of how normal a lot of the language we use here, even nematodes are becoming part of investment decisions in London, etc. So we came a long way. Still a lot of let's say paths to follow. And we've had the great fortune to interview many of actually most people on stage or the organizations you work with, and also Tom and Ish a number of times. We like to put the spotlight on practitioners, and none of that is perfect. But they're the people doing it at scale and building farms, sometimes very large scale, sometimes small scale, working on food as medicine, working on the technology to measure. And I think we're only at the beginning of how much money is trying to get into this space, and it's up to us to build responses there. Like, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the responses to when somebody says, okay, I need to put at least 500 million, that's 500 million, to work in food and agriculture in Europe, and preferably farmland? What's our response? And these are the questions we get now. Like, this is not a hypothetical situation. These are questions that are coming up, and we don't have a lot of answers yet. So we need to start thinking in larger numbers and more zeros. And with that, we had a nice amount of downloads, and extremely fortunate that people are listening to us. Of course, some supporters, the Nest, and some other trust and family offices you will see here. And we've made some investments, and that's what we're going to turn a bit here to. I think there are a number of ways you can interact with this space. It's by building something, and most of you here have. It's by also investing, and not everyone is in a position, obviously, to invest. And we've been very fortunate with Naeem, who's going to speak later, who's in the room, in back there, to set up an investment syndicate, and also to make it accessible for people, because it's nice to talk for 350 or 60 hours about, investing in regenerative agriculture and food. But would you put your own money in it? Like actual your pension money, your bank account money, like what? And we've noticed the conversation changes when there's real money on the table. So we set up a way of doing that. We're always investing personally and basically ask friends and family, would you invest with us in some of these companies? And sometimes the reaction is no, and sometimes the reaction is yes. And we've done 25 deals, which means I can actually call myself an investor in the space with usually 1,000 or 2,000 euros. So it's very limited. But a lot of this is extremely risky. And a lot of these companies, unfortunately, are not going to make it. And that's the reality of early stage investing. And I'm going to ask some Slido questions about it later as well, because I want to trigger you as well. Like, there are things to build here, but there are also things to invest in. And there could be your own money. Like, if we believe in soil health and if we believe it could have returns, are we going to put it in it or not? And it could be blocked there for 10, 15 years and we never see it again. Or it could be a very interesting return and we're all happy and celebrate. But that's unfortunately not always the reality. So far, most of the companies are still alive, which is already remarkable in the space, because it's very difficult to find product market fit. And I think Joe in Nature Metrics, like to get to 65 people, to get up to 100 plus, sorry, to get to product market fit, to see, and I know that with Thimm as well, it's not an easy journey, and it's not for the faint of heart. Please all think about if you want to start something in the space, because we need more people. But it is a marathon, and it's not easy. For the other one, and then we go. So if you want to know more, the podcast is very easily called Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. You can find it on all the platforms. But most importantly, I think start thinking about the role of entrepreneurship, money, larger organizations, food companies, because they're knocking on the door. And we need to answer if we want to stay relevant, I think, in this space. And with that, I'm going to go to Slido, which I'm going to ask Tom to, or whoever is managing. And we're going to start with a question, a personal question, actually. Who is up for starting a company in the next 2 years? So get your phone, scan the, I'm already revealing the first question, but first scan the code. Tom pushed me to make them spicy, so I'm doing that. So you can start voting, and while we do that, I think it's a question to Thimm, actually. What triggered you to build something yourself instead of, which is not an easy journey, instead of joining something or keep researching in it, Thimm?
I think there were multiple reasons, and the main one was that I always wanted to start a company. And if you can start a company that also has impact and is not just a tech company, I think that's very cool. Like, also just the fact that something grows somewhere in the world because of us, and not just like some servers spinning up and on and off, is it's nice. It's a good feeling.
And what about you, Geert? How does the Siri thing comes into it? And then we'll get to the other questions. Like, you didn't stop with one. Like, I remember you from an advisory company. Then you set up nature cemeteries. Then you set up Herenboeren. And like, it's a serial entrepreneur. Like, what's that drive, or what's that instead of staying at one thing and build that for 20, 30 years?
I think it's about my personal journey, about how my insights grow on what the world really needs. Because up till 2012, it was also that I did it in the commercial context. Like the profit as a concept was there, and then I learned that, okay, as long as we are stick to profit as a concept, there is a wrong steering compass for us. And then I thought, okay, let's start doing something else. So I really it was not for the money, it was for my own vision and my own feeling that I quit, that I sold my commercial companies. And then I thought, okay, I have learned how to be an entrepreneur. I know how to build a company. I know how to think big and start small, because I think that's what I try to do all the time. And then I thought, okay, I now have to put it in another context. And from my advisory company, where I didn't spoke about yet, but after I was with the Farmers Association, I started to advise the farmers, and I ended up with a company with 17 people, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, it's a secondary economy where I am right now. I am telling someone else to do something with my advice, and I get paid for that. But actually, if I really believe my advice, I should do it myself. And so I started doing a kind of a journey that was my own development, I think. And then I thought, okay, to me, it's a very linear story that I can tell about, that I can see.
Always looking back, you can see that it's very linear.
It's improvement,
It's funny because I remember, I sometimes remind Geert about that, how you looked as well in the advisory business. You were not as healthy, I think, as you are now. It's very interesting, and mentally as well. I remember it's a personal journey there, which might sound scary, but it is.
Oh, I'd like to talk about that as long as it's interesting. But at that point when we met, my body weight was over 100 kilos. And that was what I refer to in my profit period, because I really considered at that point that
accumulation.
I think what I really came up to, and it was in 2012 that I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at myself, and I had my daily schedule was like getting up early, doing the job, dinner and lunch from gas station, and then go on and till late in the evening, get back, neglecting my children and my wife, something like that, but also neglecting my body, because I was growing and growing. And then I realized that my body fat, literally, was illustrating the distance I had towards nature. So I think that we come from a period that there was a lot of nature, healthy people, and not a lot of money. And if you look at where we are right now, we have unhealthy people, a lot of money, and no nature anymore. So, and that insight brought me into okay, I have to take care of myself. I have to take care of the planet. I have to take care of future generations. And then I started working at my own body and my own health, also mentally. Started doing meditation and doing retreats, etc. So a lot of energy work and a lot of sports and a lot of healthy food, etc., etc. And now I am sitting here and being a happy a guy without any commercial benefits anymore, but with a lot of values to create. I think it's great.
Yeah, and just to double click on, I think the commercial piece is interesting because here to somebody that then starts calculating, like what would an ideal farm in the Netherlands look like? I think we all might think about it in your own context, but then actually putting those numbers down, what does it mean per family, per person? How much can you eat from that, etc. And now in your new venture, what does a real cooperative supermarket look like? And how accessible food could be for people. You might be surprised. We're not going to cover it here. What I find interesting is that 60% or 59 is seriously considering, and actually 10 people of the 75, so slightly more than 10, like around 12, already have a startup or are starting it soon. So come and find us after if you need any advice. Next slide, please. That's an interesting one as well. Like, have you experience with investing in this space, like your own wealth or your own money, which is not that easy because there's a lot of barriers with that as well. Like somebody said, the most, I think it was yesterday at dinner, somebody said most of people, the only investing they do is in their own house, which is an interesting concept. And how do we get that to farmland, and how do we interact with that? So, but there are some people that have done multiple deals, which is good or good. It depends. You might have lost significant money there, but at least you have experience with a world that seems always very exclusive. It's in shiny buildings in certain cities, and that's it. But our money is doing a lot of things, and if you don't pay attention to it, it's probably doing some negative things that you don't want to know about. And have you? I mean, you started a company, Anne-Sophie and Joe. Do you consider yourself an investor in the space as well? Have you have any exposure to that world? I'm putting you on the spot here now. Or not at all, which is also an answer. Like the two mics can travel.
Gosh, I've been waiting to have the two mics, so I'm really happy to have that. So no, I have no experience of that. I've been in investor meetings when we were doing a raise. That was a really brutal process. I was sort of literally just touched the sides of it, but I think some of our team are probably sort of permanently gonna suffer from PTSD. But you know, it does fascinate me, and I think it's sort of it is important to know how these things work. I'm a recovering academic, so we've been sheltered from that side of things very much so.
And Sophie, we might tape them together, the two mics. No, joking.
No, so I confess from a personal perspective, not at all. But even at Earthworm and working on that transition and the financing of it, so we're really good at looking at the private sector money and how it makes business sense for them to get into this. But still, money is missing. The transition is so expensive, and so now we are a bit like, okay, something else needs to happen, and we're looking at impact investments, a bit scratching our head about how could we make that work. So yeah, quite eager to get into it, but still scratching
Still
my head.
very early on.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Sorry. So if you were investing, where would you put it? Would you buy farmland? Would you put early stage companies? I wanted to put risky there, but I was scared nobody was going to click on it. But it's definitely risky. Would you buy stocks? How would you shape it in a theoretical case, which I think is a good exercise just to do. Let's say you have 100,000 or 5,000. Zeros don't really matter. I don't even know if PepsiCo is publicly listed. I just put them there. Interestingly, farmland is heavily overweighted in this portfolio. Real assets, yeah. Probably want to do good due diligence, as we heard before. Yeah, it's an interesting question. We always ask it on the podcast, and it will be a next one as well. Like, if you had a big pot of money, but you had to put it to work. Like, it's not just lobby or like, what would you do? And most people, it's interesting. Of course, investors thought about it, but many others, like, oh, I don't know. And that's exactly the kind of answers we want. In the sense, we want people not from the finance world to think about these kind of things because it's your money in your pension fund. It's your money on the bank that's doing these things. And you can do actually quite a lot. We're lucky in Europe. There's a lot of access to things. So I think we're sort of stable at 65 people that answered it, sorry. And it's a good majority of the answer actually going for farmland. Shall we do the next slide? Which is our billion-dollar question, euro question. If you had to put it to work, this is a word cloud, so you can do anything. Where would you start? So a billion, just for reference, is a 1 and 9 zeros, which I hope that none of you will ever have the concentrated power of, because I've yet to meet a billionaire that's happy. No, I'm serious. Like it's better spread and distributed. But if you had to do that, where would you put it to work? Where would you start? And as we're filling that out, and Sophie, I never asked you that question. What would you? I'm not asking for exact amounts, of course. I'm asking for like the biggest buckets you would put it. I asked Geert, I don't remember what you said, but I asked Thimm for sure on the podcast.
Honestly, I have no idea. Like I would be suffocating to start. And then honestly, I don't know. Like I'm stuck. I can't even imagine.
Which is what some people we have. I know one investor that won the lottery and overnight had to think about this, not at this amount, but a significant amount. Or generational wealth, like you're growing up in a family, and of course you work with wealth, and then at 18 or 21 or whatever the date is, you suddenly have access to it, or maybe some parent passes away, and suddenly there's an inheritance, and it's a barrier. It's a significant weight as well. Like, what do you do well with this? Like, how do you pass it on for generations? What would you do here now, a few years after we last spoke on the podcast?
Yeah. I definitely would not buy land because for me, it's a very scary idea that the rich people in the world will own all the land. I think it's a really scary thing, that the rich ones can decide on this limited thing we have. So I really and also that's a kind of development in my work, but I really would invest in individual programs. I really want the youth to grow up with the knowledge of how their food grows and how important soil is, etc. So I think it will be education, it will be campaigning, it will be events. I really think that I said in my keynote as well. I think the transition we are facing right now is not a one that the minister, the king, the president, or president of a company have to do. It's something that we all have to do, and I think to address all. I think that was what I would invest in.
Yeah, I see some very interesting answers here as well. Of course, by land, but training for farmers, and it's such a big piece, I think, of your work at Earthworm and also your work, because I remember how difficult it is for Herenboeren to find farmers that are able on 20 hectares to do mixed crops and interact with the public to a certain extent. Like it's not but just finding farmers that are used to multiple crops and some animals and livestock. I think you usually end up with 2 farmers just to cover it, and you're training your own farmers now, because you can't find them.
With that now they are applying with 1 centimeter of applications at the moment when there is when there's a vacancy. So they really want to work with us. But again, there is no future for these farmers if there are no people trying to change the system. I think there is a lot of addressing on the farmer and the hectares as well in policy as in technique, etc. But if there is not any social innovation coming or a big change in the food chain, I think it might even be that the farmer is getting more cost instead of more income, and have no future in the end, because what he has to do is investing in new machinery or not, preferable not, but then in other things, there is an investment to make, but the bank has already financed till where he is right now. So if not all the system is going to do the work with us, I think it's great to invest in farmers, to train them, etc., but it will have no use. Sorry for being so direct, but I really feel that my investment, if I had the money, was really going into system change, and I think it has a lot to do with a social innovation and not only technique.
Here. Let's go to the next one. 2 participants are typing. Sorry, I don't want to. And we lost it. Doesn't matter. If you could change one thing to unlock more entrepreneurship in Europe, I think we come to the and I think it's very interesting, Joe, from your perspective as well. How do we get more people in this room, scientists and others, to start companies? Like what have you seen from within, let's say, an academic led company, but definitely a company? You're 10 plus years in now, like it's a different world. Like what's a big unlock, or could be an unlock to get
Yeah.
more entrepreneurial activity in the soil health space?
Such a good question. And I think that watching Tap Bruce's kind of journey as well, because I knew
Founder of Nature Metrics.
the founder of Nature Metrics has been extraordinary. I think that there's not a lot of awareness. I think that when you're in an academic position or a post, it's, you know, all you're thinking about is publications. You know, the idea of sort of going out there into the market is quite scary. And I think that, you know, universities could be better at building that capacity in their researchers, for sure. I know that when I kind of finished my postdoc, I was basically been in Colombia and was sort of trying to use eDNA to look at fish species with some universities there. And moving into the 9 to 5 was an entirely different ball game. And I'm sort of, even now I have some terrible habits that need to be corrected. Yeah, it's challenging. I think that actually, if you're thinking about researchers, I think that maybe that starts with the universities, and if they can help kind of make those introductions, how to kind of present to as you say, you know, not mentioning the carbon or the biodiversity side when there might be a more compelling case for your investors. Being able to kind of, you know, actually pitch yourself in a way that will get the right attention is a skill that I think many of us can need to learn or get some training in.
Perfect. Yeah, and I was going to go to Thimm as well, and it's a good point actually on communication with investors is very different than communication in the academic world. Like you see the different style of presentations, you see the different even language we use, and I'm not saying everybody should become an investor or an entrepreneur, but learn the language of entrepreneurship and money, because it will help you regardless. Like will help you with mortgages of building a campus. It will help you like research. It will help you with a lot of things. Because it's also a democratic process there to make sure we understand finance and make sure we understand what's happening with, in many cases, our money. And Thimm, what do you see from like a more technical perspective, but also like the founders, you said it's very nice to use technical skills and do something like the impact side and not just a server that switches on and off. How do we get more of that? Not more of the service, but more of the companies.
I just wanted to say one thing before. There were a lot of times like less taxes. I think as a startup, you don't pay any taxes because you don't make any money in the beginning. So it doesn't really matter. I think there's really this gap between people at universities and when you do research, etc. You think about projects and like everything is a project, but what you should think about, it's like something that is more continuous. So you have like a solution, or you have a product, or you have a company that actually wants to live on. And I see it so many times, like once a project funding runs out, or like grant funding runs out, like it just goes and leads to nowhere. I think this like gap between, okay, we now grant funded something, now how can we actually get started? This is missing. And the second thing that is missing is people do a thing and they develop some nice technology or something. He wants it, but the reality of people don't ever want to have your things. And I think it just like, you just have to be so candid with yourself that like, just because you have something beautiful and that you worked on for the last 5-10 years, most likely in this current state and form that it is in, it's probably not worth it for many other people. And I think that, like really being realistic about that, and being like, if you really want to go down the startup route, start talking to actual customers and actually like someone who really wants it and whose hair is on fire.
The hair is on fire means it's a you need to fix a real problem continuously, otherwise there's just no business. Next slide. Two people are typing, but it's too long. Then we go to the open source side, and especially in the technical world, like what is that at odds with building large thriving businesses? Of course, in Europe, we want more larger thriving businesses where we love SMEs, definitely, but we also need slightly larger ones just to have more research happening, there's more space, there's economies of scale. I just love to throw this one in, just to see if what we think here in the room and what you think. I see an active poll, and of course, it's a constant conversation also in AI for soil health. And with Tom and Ish, like what's the open layer? What are the things on top being built? And maybe this is a question for Joe as well. Like, what do you see in terms of the open source side of a lot of the data and the research? Is that the same in? I mean, remote sensing is one thing, but also in eDNA. How do you guard your economic activity, but not block it, let's say.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one for us. We use a lot of open source databases for the barcodes for species. We also have our own one that we curate from across those. It's a real challenge. I think that there's a lot you can do with open source, and you know, half the art of building a business is being able to package things up, and that's what the open source thing is about. We have invested a huge amount of R&D. Oh, sorry, we've invested a huge amount of R&D into some of our bioinformatics pipelines. So when it comes to publishing our work, you know, we don't disclose that, but we do try and ensure that we provide a sort of as smaller black box as is possible for that to get peer reviewed and published. That it is a challenge, and you know, there's a wider argument in the sector that we work in as well between genomic sequences and sharing them with the country of origin. It's just something we're working towards, GBIF and things like that. Yeah, it's tricky, I would say.
I see a switch here. Let's go to the next one because I have 10, I think, in total, and I want to have time for some Q&A. I saw that there were a few questions, or I saw there's some. Why is of course I put it a bit strongly, but why is Europe so poor at startups? And if it's none of these, I have a word cloud one after one, so you can fill in everything you want. There's a word cloud coming after, Tom. I just wanted to force you to choose one of those and then see risk aversion. See a strong, we're at 21 people. Now we're getting, who wants to take this from the panel? If somebody has a strong inclination of.
We're not in Europe anymore, sadly. So.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Continent plus pond. We'll wait for it's a strong risk aversion, and the funding piece, of course. Luckily, we don't think it's a lack of talent, which is the most difficult one to fix, probably. You have a theory, okay?
Maybe, like I said, it might be a theory. I don't know, you know. But what I think is that, and that sounds a little bit crazy in terms of an entrepreneur, but I think we have to forget the concept of the consumer. I think that as well in politics as via companies, we are constantly approached as a consumer. And that gives me as a person also the feeling that my power of initiating something as a human being is not addressed, because I can choose whatever either government or companies bring to me. So I think when we forget the concept of the consumers, and then we can address people again in what can you do and how can you contribute? So
citizen or as active.
Look at what citizen science can bring. You know, that's what we have to use on our soil when we measure soil, for example, soil, for example. Yeah, we need people, and there are so many people who want to contribute, who are running around with beautiful ideas, not to know how to start with, and that is because we are constantly saying you don't have to think, you don't have to think, and it's just a theory. So I don't know.
No, it's an interesting one. Go ahead, Anne.
To complement your theory, there's something also, and I want to ask you actually, guys, like, is being an entrepreneur, like, are you some kind of species, or can you learn to be an entrepreneur? Because sometimes I think people have ideas, but it's like, oh no, it's not for me. Like, I'm not an entrepreneur. Like, it's something special. Is it something special, or can you become one? Can you learn how to be an entrepreneur?
We're getting to the heart of the matter.
I mean, clearly you can learn it. I think that is, but the question is still, do you want to do it? And I would, probably the majority of people, I would always say not to do it, because it's just so harsh. Like, you have to, like, if you just get a salary and just like don't have to fight for everything that you do every single time and like defend yourself in front of 100 investors and maybe one of them finally says yes. I mean, it's a horrible reality, and like, I don't know, like, it's fun, but you learn a lot, but like it's also a lot of suffering, and I would not suggest too many people to go into it, because it's like, if the ecosystem could be better, and I saw, for example, like, you get a salary while you're doing like starting a startup. I think these are great ideas, because it takes away this like risk of livelihood that you can clearly have. Like, I didn't have an income, for example, for 2 years, and like not many people can afford that kind of like hit, and like if they didn't make really good money or so before. And I think that is still and will be the reality in Europe. And every time policymakers also talk about these kind of things, they don't really talk about like how hard it is. And yeah, so I would say it's tough to recommend someone to go into it. And if they still want to do it, then maybe they're the right people.
Good answer. Yeah.
I'm a total sheep. I want that monthly payroll. But no, I think that is there a way that you can do both? You know, the side hustle route. You know, it can be a bit of a compromise, but yeah, that's probably going to give you burnout as well.
Probably, yeah. No, it's at the point I think of policy as well, or investors as well. Like it's very easy from the other side, and the people risk their livelihoods and risk their mortgages and risk a lot of things. That's why usually they're quite young, not only because of age, but also you have less to lose. And if you can catch up on other things, you learn a lot. And definitely don't want to discourage anybody. But it's tough running your own company, and that's a no, but reality. Let's not paint the picture too nice. Next slide. This is the word cloud. So if you click, I think we should be able, oh no, there should be a word cloud, or maybe I messed it up. Okay, so it should be coming. So now you can do all your creativity in this one. What is it beyond the 3 options I gave you before? And maybe there was, Tom was saying there's not enough space, not enough options. So this is your moment. And have you seen a change? I think that's for the panel, because many of you have been in the space for a number of years, and this space is a very general thing. Have you seen a change in the last 18 months, 2 years, in terms of interest, in terms of people, in terms of like, is there something shifting, or are we still in our tiny little bubble?
I think that there's the nature side of things. You know, that I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago. I think
Hold it a bit more like an ice
more
cream.
like this.
An ice cream.
Okay. I think that there's a bit of a change where you can kind of peg nature to what you're trying to do. You know, private investment in nature has gone from 9 billion in 2020 to something like 112 billion. I shouldn't have those figures in my head, but I was looking at this about a week ago. So it's crazy. If you can peg things to that, you know, that's really exciting. And that shows a real will sort of from the private market that they want to invest in nature. So that's a good signal.
Yeah, we see that as well with the podcast. People not from the agriculture and food space or nature space coming into it and getting hooked somehow, and then want to build things or want to get involved with all the naivety that comes with it, because it takes 5, 7, 10 years to grow a tree, and people have to learn that every single time. But it's definitely, we're seeing an interest from the rest of economy, let's say, to get into the space. And I think you see that with large companies as well. Here we see bureaucracy, culture, cost of living. That's definitely an issue.
I would say things have changed over the last year, or sort of year and a half. I think that it's become a lot harder to attract investment. There's a lot more questions being asked than there were before. A bit of a chill headwind, I think, in globally. Yeah, I mean, the last
It's
couple
not
of
going to
weeks
get better anytime soon. So
yeah,
it's even more brutal to raise. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, it's a challenge.
Okay, let's keep going. Tom, can we do the next one? So how entrepreneur friendly is Europe for region food and ag startups? So which 1 is terrible and 5 is excellent? Anybody wants to take startups? It could be a very broad group, obviously. It could be non-profits as well, but it's for starting something. How's it been in the Netherlands for you, Geert? 4, 5, 6 initiatives and counting.
Best illustrated, I think, is that I was referred to as "you're not going to work with crazy Geertjes." I
You were
was
referred to as the
crazy,
crazy person.
yeah, the
Okay.
crazy person. Yeah. So, and I think what we have a lack of is the good examples. You know, I see a lot of entrepreneurs willing to step into their own regenerative farm or so, but then the ideal is bigger than the income. And I think that also that frames us a little bit. A lot, I think. Like, okay, if you go regenerative, you cannot make any money. You have to be very idealistic, etc. So I think what we have right now in the Netherlands, and I think we have to be very, very um, uh, how you say that, modest again. You know, we have this big, well, we are the best in producing food and extracting everything from the hectares that we can reach out. We are the number 2 exporter of agriculture. Shut up. We are we only have 4% of our organic market, for example, 3.9. I think we are the lowest in Europe, I think.
World champion of biodiversity loss.
Exactly. So all all the upside in the amount of food also had the downside, and I think that as long as our culture still is, we can do this, we have to do this, technique will follow, we can solve everything. I think there is just a frame in regenerative work, like, yeah, why should you do it if you cannot make any money? So
Difficult. What is
I think
difficult to be green when your numbers are in the red?
I think, and what has changed now with you were asking me about the politics in the Netherlands, and since the elections, last elections, I see one thing. I see that a few initiatives out of the regenerative movement are now stretching their hand towards conventional farmers. Like, okay, now we stop spreading the dogmas that we know how it works, and now we are going to work together and try to find the both of best worlds. And that's the big change I see. But I think it's still very hard to start in the Netherlands with what I did and what I do. You know, I fully agree. You have to. It's harsh. Yeah.
And just to set you up for a lunch meeting afterwards, um, that's one of the issues you found with Herenboer. Like, it doesn't solve what's the current conventional farmer going to do, and it does an accessibility. Hence, you set up Robin, the truly cooperative, or what a cooperative supermarket should be like. Anyway, if you want to find out more, find him during lunch. Let's do the next one. I don't know how many we have left. I cannot see the overview. What's the let's go through this one fast. We're still, how many do we have left, Tom? One left. Perfect. And then we have 12 questions which you can vote on. So which you are already voting on, I think. So only one is ranking. This is the ranking one. Let's see if this gets juices flowing. Otherwise, we move to the next. Surprised? Surprised? Yeah, there were only 5 until now, so it's a very small sample size. Yeah, I would say capital is there. It's accessing it, which is not easy, or very difficult. Well, let's rephrase. Because it's not like meeting 100 investors and maybe one says yes is actually quite a good score. Like, you can do hundreds and no is I'd say the 99.9% of the answers. I know. The risk aversion is interesting. Yeah, risk aversion. I'm wondering if that's changing now with the current chaos we're in terms of tariffs and politics. If more people start to take more risks because, or not, and retreat, and because everything is scary, let's wait. I see that with investors. Like, the moment the world goes into chaos, some people start making large bets. Public markets, the best moment is to buy when everything goes down. And others are like, okay, let's wait until next year when the storm has passes or whatever, and just don't make any investments anymore. So it's that double reaction we often see with chaos. And yeah, you're going to be caught in the middle of that. So let's do oh no, one is still ranking, sorry. Let's do the last one, then we go to questions. And I want to not
really crazy that the number 4 is market demand, and it's because that can solve the 3 above that. You know, it's crazy that's not on number 1, because what we have to do is change the consumer demand, and risk will appear, regulations will follow. I think investment will come. So it's crazy that it's just on number 4, I think. Sorry.
no, very good point. It's a very good point. Yeah, the scientists, but you're all also consumers. I hate to use the word, and active citizens. And yeah, how do we, like, who doesn't want to eat healthy if it's accessible? Who doesn't? I think there's a huge unmet potential there. Last one, thriving businesses. What's missing in soil? Like, to turn successful soil health research, which you're all, I'm just going to put you all in the successful bucket. How do you turn that into businesses? This is a word cloud again. So market, okay, we're getting there. Market stays there. Yeah. You influence this one strongly here. Creativity, I'm imagining. Yeah. Yeah, which comes back to the point you made as well, Thimm. Like somebody needs to buy it. Like continuously, preferably, otherwise. And you've looked for that in cover crops. I don't know if you want something to add to that, or we go to questions. 9 are still typing. Let's get to 35, 36 people. I don't think market is going to lose its power. So thank you so much for the Slido questions. And now we go to Q&A, I think. Let's see how that comes up. Great. So people voted. Very good. You can still vote. We're going to cover a few, and then we're going to go to lunch. So Geert, actually, you can read your question. I don't need to.
If there is improvement, yes. Yes, there is. But the problem we are facing is that if we want to have it proven scientifically, we do not have enough money. So there is when we invite scientists to come over and look at, and so you have the best professional judgment, and that's and you know, we can see it obviously, you know, the amount of the amount of organic matter and animals living and species living in the soil, for example. So you can see it, but to have it proven, so to speak, it costs a lot of money, and we do not have it. So only by vision and by best professional judgment. Yeah, but we can see definitely something that there's something happening slowly by slowly, because it's not a quick process.
And then actually there's a question for you as well, but we can go to Anne-Sophie as well. 5 CEOs in the Netherlands decided what's on our plate, basically. And this is an older slide, so it might even be 4 now. Like there's always
Still 5.
It goes through a very small, if you remember the slide of Geert, farmers on the left, and then we go through a number of choking points, basically. And actually supermarkets, like a few, like 2 or 3 big ones in the Netherlands, and then mostly small ones. But before that, there's the wholesale, and those are 5. How do we break that monopoly? It's not a monopoly, but yeah, how do we?
Good question. Not.
And so, do you have any thoughts? Because
no, because you know, if it was so easy, if the answer was already there, why are we struggling so long to do something with it? You know, I really do not know how to do it. I think these 5, they have shareholders, and the shareholders' benefits are more important than everything else in the world. I think that's to go short. There will be new ones, of course, but I think that is still the big barrier in the system. And as long as we cannot break that, and I do not know how, because money is still the biggest thing that we are trusting all our decisions, I think, on, instead of next generation. So I don't know. I do not have any answer.
And you and Sophie, you're working on decommodification, like working with a number of these. Breaking is maybe a heavy word, but how do you break it?
2 things. Well, the first one is a concern, because I don't know if we will ever manage to break this, but the trend is probably for the number of farmers to be less. And then, well, the number of CEOs are not going to go up, but they're going to probably at some point, go down to owning the land and doing stuff with it. So it's a bit of a concern. It's even more concentration to what we have already. So it's quite, yeah. You were saying, well, behind the CEOs, they are the shareholders. So it's that whole thing about reinvesting in nature. And for me, for now, companies are really seeing it at, oh, it's going to cost me more for my raw material. So still the commodity logic. I want to buy things as cheap as possible, whereas actually investing in nature has a cost. But as long as it's seen as, or fast to increasing the cost of raw material, it's going to be a problem instead of being seen as an investment or reinvestment in nature. So that's flip needs to happen if we want this to change, I think.
Yeah, and one of the other potential levers there is the quality of produce. And you see that now with the food as medicine, or nutrient quality or nutrient density, like it really changes. It's a shame if you grow with different practices and you have a much better quality. We see that in dairy, we see it in a lot of vegetables, we see it in citrus, and then it goes into the commodity market. Like then there's something is going wrong. It's not to say that every farmer should build their own and go to the farmer's market, but there's something there on the market demand side or on the excess side. Like how do you distinguish that? How do we have to build new grain silos? Like how do you and make sure that if somebody somehow improves quality significantly, we find a market for that, and hopefully a premium or in some shape or form to reward that. And it's because it's a quality issue. We're very good to do that in wine. We're starting to get better in coffee, specialty coffees. There are markets for quality olive oil. There's a very regulated market in that sense. People pay for polyphenol levels, and you know that if you hit that, you get a much better price for your crop. In many other crops, it's all the same. So there's a decommodification piece there. And of course, a lot of the traders became big because of commodification. They could just choose wherever to get it from. If it was Vietnam or Taiwan, it doesn't really matter as long as you get your ship in. And that's changing, but it's that breaking. There's a breaking point there. I want to tackle, because we're starting to get on time. And they're changing. Well, thank you for voting. So we're going to go for the greenwashing or the open data. You want to add something, Joe? Okay.
I think that the top two questions there are so linked, actually, because I think that what we're aiming for at Naturmetrics is to have data that's really transparent, so that people can basically come to the same conclusions that the companies have. You can say, hey, look, here's the data. This is why we think this. We've used our restoration tracker scores and that sort of thing to be able to demonstrate why you can make those claims. So I feel like, if you've got the data that's open that you're willing to share, which demonstrates that you're regenerative, then you're not greenwashing, because you've got the substance to back it up with. But I do agree that regenerative is really vague as a concept. It's a bit like nature positive at the moment, right? You're probably going to have Aramco saying that they're nature positive, and that doesn't really make sense. But,
like Saudi oil company.
Yeah, sorry, Saudi oil company. But who's to stop them? It's a real challenge for these terms at the moment.
Any last words before we wrap up? And I want to let you go to any votes. Eradicate greenwashing. I think focus on results. Quality is a big piece. Like if you can show your citrus is X times or whatever the number is differently, you're gonna have a different market, because people, we're all obsessed with soil health, but the rest of the world is obsessed with their health and their children's health. So it's a much more interesting market access. And like if you can, of course, prices is important, but if you can show this carrot has X, Y, Z in it compared to another one, even if the price is the same, who's not going to choose the more nutrient dense or the more nutrient quality one? Any final
just on the greenwashing, it's a really interesting topic, because I think that companies need to be able to share the work that they're doing, but how can they do that in a way that isn't greenwashing? There's also green hushing, whereby companies don't actually say what they're doing because they don't want to put their head above the parapet, because by showing what you're doing and demonstrating what you're doing, someone will basically scrutinize you even further. So it's really difficult, especially in the world of social media, Elon Musk's X, Y, Z, whatever, which is, it's a real challenge. I don't know what the answer is there.
Do you see that as well? And Sophie, like green hushing, like companies actually doing really interesting stuff, but not mentioning it out of fear of not being perfect or not wanting to take the stage?
Not that much.
Would be nice to
But
see more.
I would not kill, I would not shoot the word regenerative, because the fact is that there's a lot of traction behind this. There's a lot of money, there's willingness to do something. But what we have to demand is clarity on what they mean and to prove or to sustain their claims. So when we are working with our technical framework, that's precisely what we are saying. We're like, if you want to say that your product is regenerative, you need to be able to sustain it, which is why we are doing all this. And yes, it's a bit costly and the measurement is a bit heavy, but otherwise it's just BS. But yeah, regenerative, let's not kill the term, because behind this right now, there's real traction. There are many companies mobilizing. It would be a bit of a pity to stop that. I think we have to demand that it's serious, taken seriously.
Yeah, which is a great way, I think, to wrap up and also refer to the podcast you shared before, Tom, where, of course, we can question a lot on the regenerative side, but just from, I think, anybody that's worked in agroecology or has worked in food and agriculture for decades or more, this is a moment and a time where a term and practices and like an attention has been put on soil that we've never seen before. Organic has never reached any of this. And I'm not saying organic is perfect, or let's not go in that debate, and you see people in the organic space getting annoyed as well. Like regen is getting all the headlines. And for good and bad, it's partly greenwashing, but let's ride that wave. We're not going to stop that wave. Like we have finally some attention for soil and for all the things it can do and should do and how bad it's degraded. So let's use that. Let's use it to put money to work, to put sensors in, to change supply webs and change, and to get a lot better food on our table. And with that, I want to thank our panelists so much for coming here, first of all, to share in keynotes, most of you, and to, of course, share the stage here and be Q&A'd by Slido and all of you in the room. And now I'm going to send you off to lunch for an hour. See you at 2.